Dr.MGR Educational and Research Institute, University, Madurai, Chennai. Dr.MGR Educational and Research Institute, University, Madurai, Chennai.
Good evening, everybody. I feel privileged to extend a warm welcome you all for an international webinar on From Literature to Communicative Competence, the Paradigm Shift, organized by Department of English, Dr.MGR Educational Research Institute. This is Jayamata. I'm an assistant professor, Department of English, shall be your host for the day. I'm very glad to say that we are crossing 1000 plus registration, and thank you for supporting us. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome our eminent chief guest, Dr. Roy P. Veettil, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Language Studies, Sohar University, Oman. We also have with us Dean Dr. S. Manivannan and Deputy Dean Academics Dr. A.R. Arunachalam and Deputy Dean Administration Professor K. Senthil Kumar, Adayalampattu Phase II Campus, Dr.MGR Educational Research Institute. It rightly said the most successful man in the life is the man who has the best information. So I assure that this program shall be full of exuberance and excitement, and it will create an informative one for all of us. Now I call upon Mrs. E. Julie Elizabeth, head in charge, to formally welcome the gathering. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Jay Mada. A warm good afternoon to all. A cheerful welcome to you all. Your presence makes us very happy. Welcoming is the tradition of our Indian culture. I, Mrs. A. Julie Elizabeth, Associate Professor and Head in Charge, Department of English, feels extremely happy and privileged to welcome you all for an international webinar on From Literature to Communicative Competence, the Paradigm Shift, organized by the Department of English, Faculty of Humanities and Science, Adayalampattu Phase II Campus of Dr.MGR Educational and Research Institute, University, Chennai, Tamil Nadu. My heartfelt gratitude to our beloved founder, Chancellor Tri A.C. Shanmugam, and our Honorable President, Engineer A.C.S. Arun Kumar, for giving us the digital platform to conduct useful and valuable programs to broaden our knowledge. I'm very happy to welcome our Dr. Geeta Lakshmi, our adored Vice Chancellor of our esteemed university. Her inspiration and motivation leads us to update our knowledge in various fields. I welcome our vibrant registrar, Dr. C.B. Palnivelu, an intellectual personality who always stands behind every program of this university. I'm very delighted to welcome our Joint Registrar Phase II, Dr. S. Ramlingam, and Dean Dr. S. Manivannan, Phase II Campus, for their support and guidance, always with us for this event. I welcome you, sir. I also welcome our Deputy Dean Academic, Dr. A.R. Arunachalam, and Professor K. Senthil Kumar, Administration Phase II, for their valuable suggestions and encouragements towards this event. I'm delighted to welcome the eminent speaker of the day, Dr. Roy P. Veettil, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Language Studies, Sohar University, Oman, has accepted our invitation to familiarize the participants with the use of literature in general and short stories in particular to enhance the linguistic competence of the learners of English. We welcome you, sir. It is my pleasure to welcome the Dean, Head, and faculties, both teaching and non-teaching, of the English Department for this event. I'm delighted to welcome my beloved participants, research scholars, and students from all over the nation for this webinar. I hope this webinar will help to understand the wide knowledge about the literature in general and the short stories in particular to enhance their skills in the linguistic competence of the learners of English. I also welcome all the heads of various departments and all the teaching and non-teaching faculties for their valuable presence for this national webinar. Finally, I would like to welcome my department organizers, Dr. Harshini, Ms. Jaymada, and Ms. Akshaya, who have been taken much effort in organizing this event within a short duration. I wish that this program will have a great blow on everyone on the whole. Once again, I welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I kindly request all the participants put on your queries in the chat box. so that at the end of the session, we will clear your all doubts. The feedback cum assessment form, it will be posted at the end of the session. Also available in YouTube description box. It will be activate at 3 p.m. Now I invite our Deputy Dean Academics Phase 2, Dr. A.R. Arunachalam, to deliver the felicitation address. Over to you, sir.
So thank you, ma'am. So good afternoon to all of you. So on behalf of Dr.MGR Educational Research Institute, Adayalampattu Phase II Campus, I would like to welcome you all to another event today, which is happening online right now, an international webinar on from literature to communicative competence, the paradigm shift conducted by Department of English at Phase II Campus. So I always wholeheartedly thank our Honorable President, Engineer A.C. Arun Kumar Sir, for his enormous support towards connecting various kinds of activities. And I really thank him for his kind approval today to conduct this international webinar on a large scale. So I'm very happy to know that more than 1,000 participants have registered for this webinar, which shows already the success of this program. I congratulate the Department of English today, especially for taking this wonderful effort in conducting this international webinar. So especially the head of the Department of English, Mrs. Julia Elizabeth, and then Dr. P. Harshini, as well as the other staff members, Mrs. Jai Mada, who's hosting this event today, and as well as Mrs. Akshaya, who is taking care of the technical support. So I really congratulate the whole team for their enormous efforts in conducting this international webinar successfully. So as you all know, I mean, always resource persons play an important role for all kinds of sessions. And luckily, we are happy to have today an eminent person with us today on the studio. Dr. Roy P. Veettil, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Language Studies, Sohar University, Oman. So thank you so much, sir, for accepting all the way to take this wonderful session today. So really, on behalf of our university, I really thank you for accepting our invitation to spend your valuable time with us to take this very much informative and very much knowledgeable session. And also, I think the participants always, without participants, there is no event. And today we are having 1,000 plus participants who are watching this webinar live. So I really appreciate all the participants for spending your time registering for such kind of valuable informative webinars which could add more value to your career as well as to your profession. So definitely this session will add more value. So at the end of the day, I think this session, through this session, you'll have a good takeaway. So I wish this event a grand success, and I congratulate the department once again for taking this effort in conducting this international webinar on a very important topic. So I thank the department for giving me an opportunity to talk a few words about this event. So I wish all the participants all the best. Have a great day and have a great session too. Thank you all.
Excuse me, Jayamata ma'am. I think due to some technical issue, Jayamata ma'am will join soon. Now I request Dr. P. Hashni ma'am to introduce our eminent chief guest.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a matter of extreme privilege to introduce the eminent and knowledgeable resource person of today's webinar, Dr. Roy P. Veettil. Before I proceed further, I should tell you all about my personal interaction with Dr. Roy. I got introduced to Dr. Roy through Dr. P.M. Binu just a few days ago and understood from his conversation that he's such a humble, warm, and friendly personality. When I expressed my desire to host him for a webinar at our university, not only did he immediately give his acceptance, but also went too professional by mailing all the details required for the webinar in a perfect style and much well in advance. Everything was so smooth, and I should proudly say that for the topic that he has given for the presentation, we received nearly 1,000 plus registrations. Now, Let me introduce this able personality to you all. Dr. Roy is currently Assistant Professor of Applied Linguistics at the Faculty of Language Studies, Sohar University, Oman. His academic credentials include MA in English Literature, B.Ed, Cambridge, CELTA, PGCTE, IELTS, Train the Trainer from British Council, MPhil, and PhD. He has been associated with professional organizations such as English Teachers Interaction Forum, English Scholars Beyond Borders, English Language Teachers Professional Network, and TESOL Oman. He has published several book chapters and articles in journals indexed in Scopus and Web of Science. He has also authored a book entitled Changing Paradigms in English Language Teaching and has edited another book entitled An Anthology of Mini Sagas from the Omani Classroom. Currently, he is on the editorial board of the international journal titled English Language, Literature and Culture. He has also presented several papers in both national and international ELT conferences and has delivered keynote speeches at some others, including the International ELT Conference organized by VIT Velu and the TESOL Conference organized by TESOL Oman. It is really a privilege that you are here with us today, sir, to enlighten the academic community of teachers, students, and research scholars. Needless to mention, you are an inspiration for all of us. May the Lord Almighty shower His unceasing blessings upon you and help you win more and more laurels in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was really incredible, sir, and thanks for accepting our invitation. And we are immensely honored by your presence. And dear participants, a kindly request put on your queries in the chat box so that at the end of the session we will clear your doubts. The feedback come assessment form it will be posted at the end of the session and also available in YouTube description box. It will be activated at 3 p.m. and the e-certificate for the participants will be sent to the registered email ID immediately on completion of feedback form. Without any further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, Dr. Roy P. Veettil, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Language Studies, Sohar University, Oman. Sir, we request you to take over the session, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I have a long list of people to thank. Thank you very much, Dr. Harshini, for getting in touch with me, first of all, and for offering me this opportunity to be part of the Indian Academia once again. In fact, I think it's my privilege that I could be part of this program, which is so wonderfully organized. I have been immensely taken up by the way you have organized it, the professional way you are doing it actually. So thank you once again for inviting me to this session. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I am a bit elated actually listening to the words that you have spoken about me. Thank you once again. So thank you, Dr. Julie Elizabeth. Thank you, Jayamada. Thank you, Dr. Arunajalam and Akshaya for all the support you have offered and for all the great introduction you have already made. All right. So, as Dr. Jayamada rightly said, without much ado, that is again back to literature, right? Much ado about nothing. So, without much ado, let me get into my presentation today. Let me share my slides with you. Can you see the slides, please? Is it visible to you?
Yes, sir, it's visible, sir.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. All right. So as you can see from the first slide, and as it is already mentioned, so the topic of our session today is from literature to communicative competence, the paradigm shift. So in this presentation, I'll be briefly talking about how we use literature traditionally in the English classrooms, especially in the Indian context, and then how we use English now. So what has been the paradigm shift in the use of literature in the English language classroom, not only in India, across the globe actually. And of course, you can notice a very visible change in the way literature has been used in the language classrooms today. And that's why I call it the paradigm shift. So if you look at what you call the traditional way English has been used in our classrooms, traditionally speaking, English actually meant, teaching of English actually meant teaching of English literature. It was nothing but a teaching of English literature, familiarizing learners with, the great writers. And that also, literature actually meant only Anglophone literature. Nobody considered literature coming from the other parts of the world. For example, if you look at the history of English teaching in India, I think at the beginning there was nothing like Indian English writing that had no place in the language classrooms or not even in the literature classrooms. It was considered like not part of English literature. Only later could Indian English or writings in Indian English could find a place in our university syllabi. So traditionally speaking, as I told you right now, classroom, that is English classroom, traditionally meant teaching of English literature, and that too Anglophone literature. And if you look at the variety of English that is emerging in India, which of course we call the Indian English, you will find what you call an effect of this aspect, which means the effect of literature also on the variety of English that we are using today. So the variety called Indian English, which of course is emerging as an international variety with a global acceptance. And there have also been some studies which say that Indian English is perhaps the most or the globally intelligible English because of its neutral accent. I'm not talking about the variety of Englishes that we have within our country. I'm talking about what we officially call as General Indian English, or GIE, which is actually ripped off all the elements of the local languages that we have in the country. So now the point is, if you look at this variety of English, which is called the General Indian English, which is getting global acceptance these days, you will find a lot of elements of literature in the variety of English that we are using. You will notice that when Indians speak English, or when an Indian uses English, you will find a lot of elements of literature creeping into it, knowingly or unknowingly, because we basically learned English from literature, not from what you call, not from the street or not from real life situations. And that is why maybe you have heard this comment made by V.K. Krishnamenon, who was a cabinet minister in Nehru's government. So once V.K. Krishnamenon was asked why he was using such decorative language in his spoken communication, or why he was using such flowery language in his communication, and then it is said that V.K. Krishnamenon replied saying, "We Indians learn English from classics, from world classics, not from ghettos." So this is what he replied when he was asked why his literature, why his English was so decorative and so flowery. So in his reply, actually, you have the answer to that question: why our English has become so heavy, why our English has been, enriched or impoverished. I don't know what to call that, with the use of so many bombastic words and with the use of so many, aspects of formal language. So this is what Sanayal also calls the world gig of circumlocution. Because in Indian variety of English, we have a tendency to impress the audience. The purpose of our speaking or the purpose of our communication is not to make sure that the message is put across to the listener. Very often it is to impress the listener, and that is why we go for bombastic words and decorative expressions in language. And what happened later on is, with the adoption of the communicative approach to English language teaching, literature was put aside because of these criticisms that I have already talked to you. Because when literature is used, the language becomes decorative, the language becomes unreal, the language becomes heavily formal, like you can find in Indian English. And what Sanayal calls the world gig of circumlocution. So instead of, if you want to say, please stop laughing, instead of saying, please stop laughing directly, this is something I have taken from the book written by Sanayal in English. She calls it English, the handbook for every English-speaking Indian. It's a book written by Sanayal. And there she says, instead of asking somebody, please stop laughing, an Indian might say, will you please suppress your instantaneous outrage of merriment? So will you please suppress your instantaneous outrage of merriment? So indirectly, you are asking somebody to stop laughing. But look at the kind of language that is used there. So because of all these issues, literature was kept outside the classroom in the second phase of English teaching in India. Literature was, kept outside the classroom, if not in India, in many parts of the world. And that actually happened with the adoption of the communicative approach to English language teaching. So people found that literature doesn't help people to improve their communicative competence, and therefore literature was unfairly kept outside the classroom. And that also had its own problems, because one of the main criticisms that people say about what you call the communicative approach to language teaching is that the materials used in communicative language classroom is often mechanical and it is repetitive in nature. It focuses only on what you call the conveyance of information to the listener or to the reader or to the receiver of the message. It doesn't focus on the other aspects of language. So it fails to realize that language is used for much more than simple conveyance of information. It is not only the information that you want to convey. You have the human feelings, you have the human attitudes, you have many other aspects, when it comes to communication. So, but one main criticism against communicative approach has been that uh, in communicative language teaching, it has become repetitive, it has become mechanical, and it has therefore become monotonous. So in order to rectify these mistakes of communicative language teaching, there was a revival of the use of literature in the classroom. But as I told you before, you can always notice a paradigm shift in the use or in the way literature is now used in the language classroom. We don't use it the way it was used before. You will find that English or English literature rather is used now to promote, to enhance, to develop the linguistic competence of the learners, not to familiarize them with Anglophone literature, not to familiarize them with the culture of this Anglophone literature, the culture that this Anglophone literature represents, but rather the focus has now been how to develop, or the focus has now been on developing or enhancing the linguistic competence of our students. So now literature has been widely used, and mainly short stories have become the belly or the most attractive piece of literature, the runner of literature in the English classroom. And why has English become the most attractive runner for English language practitioners is because short stories are practical. And what do you mean by short stories are practical? When you say short stories are practical, it means unlike a novel or unlike a long drama, you can cover a short story in a single classroom. In fact, this is one of the norms laid down by Edgar Allan Poe, who is known as the father of modern short stories. According to the norms laid down by Edgar Allan Poe, a short story is to be written in around 4,000 to 5,000 words. That means you can finish reading a short story in one sitting. It doesn't take more than 15 to 20 minutes for a reader to finish reading a short story. And at the same time, you have the satisfaction of having read a complete story in 15 to 20 minutes. We don't have time now. We are all we all have hectic schedules. It's a very busy world now, you see. So there is a kind of rush everywhere, and therefore we can't afford to spend maybe a couple of hours or maybe a couple of days on reading a novel. And therefore people actually go for short stories because of the modern what you can call the frenetic pace of life, the mad speed at which people are moving today. So teachers find that short stories are actually very practical, and short stories are practical because you can deal with a short story, you can discuss the whole short story within the time frame allowed for a single class, which of course is something like 45 to 50 minutes. And secondly, short stories are also very simple, because in short stories you don't have lots of figurative language, you don't have lots of representational language used in short stories. Short stories can be easily understood, unlike a poem in which you may have lots of local symbols, global symbols, a lot of connotative use of language. Unlike what you call this runner called poems, in a short story you have very simple language. In most short stories you have language which is easily digestible for the reader, and you can enjoy the story. So short stories are practical because of the limited time frame it deals with, and secondly, short stories are also simple. And short stories have a variety of choice for different interests and tastes. You have variety of short stories. You have short stories that deal with horror. You have short stories that deal with romance. You have short stories that deal with many other things. So depending on your interest, depending if you are interested in detective stories, you have stories written by Edgar Allan Poe himself, dealing with the crimes, dealing with how the police investigate crimes. So if you want fairy tales, you have fairy tales. You can go for fables, you can go for anecdotes. If you want to go for a modern short story, you can go for that. So short stories can be used with all levels. You can use short stories with all levels of learners. Doesn't matter whether your students are what you call intermediate level students or pre-intermediate level students or advanced level students. Depending on how you would like to use a short story, you can develop the activities depending on the level and the standard of your students. You can mold it, you can shape it according to your needs. So these are some of the advantages of using short stories. And again, if you take into consideration what you can call globalization, the global spread of English, the unprecedented way in which people communicate with each other these days, cultural awareness is actually very important. We'll come to that point when we talk about what actually is meant by communicative competence. And one advantage of using short stories is that short stories help raise cultural awareness, because you have short stories from different cultural backgrounds. You have characters in short stories who belong to different cultures. For example, let us take what you call a very popular short story. It's a fairy tale actually. Everybody knows that story, the story of Cinderella. Everybody knows that story. Cinderella goes to the ball. Cinderella goes to the dance party, and that is where the prince chooses, his future bride. So Cinderella goes to that party. The prince invites people or beautiful girls from across the country to come to her ball, to come to his party, the dance party, so that he can choose a suitable life partner for him. So I teach here in Oman. So in the Omani context, it is something new to my students, because I think in the Indian context also it is something very new to us. But you are familiarized, or you are getting an opportunity to come to know about varying cultures in the world. You get an opportunity to familiarize yourself with different cultural contexts across the globe. Maybe you can ask your students in the Indian context. We can ask them, if you are teaching the story Cinderella in the classroom, we can ask them, to compare Sita Swayamvara. We all know that story, Sita Swayamvara, where the girl chooses, where Sita chooses her life partner from a list of suitors through an evaluation of a certain task assigned. I think in the case of Sita, it was lifting Shiva Dhanush, Lord Shiva's bow. And Rama does that, and that is how Rama marries Sita. You see, one practice in one culture and the other practice in another culture. And in the context of international communication, in the context of what you call the present context of the world having becoming one, at least in certain aspects, cultural awareness is important. We will come to that point later on when we talk about what you call linguistic competence. So short stories present language in context. This is another advantage of using, for that matter, for using literature in the English language classroom. When language is presented in context, you can easily guess the meaning of certain words. Maybe you don't know the meaning of a particular word used in the text, but if you know the context in which it has been used, if you look at some of the words used before and used after and the total background of the story, it becomes easy for the reader to guess the meaning of that particular word without referring to a dictionary. So this is what you find in short stories also. Language is presented in context, and that makes it more mnemonic. It aids our memory when it is presented in context, especially through stories. Children never forget what they read or what they listen to in a story. Another most important advantage of using short story is that short stories use both referential and representational language. So we will talk about that again in detail later on. But what do you understand by representational language? Referential language is the ordinary way, the normal way in which we use language. I say table, that means I refer to an object called a piece of furniture called table. When I say pen, I refer to that tool called pen. It is referential language where the word directly corresponds to or directly refers to the object, that it stands for. But representational language means it requires some kind of decoding. So of course, in every message, there is a kind of decoding. I say something and then that message is decoded by the receiver of the message. There is a kind of decoding in any kind of communication. The message has to be properly decoded. Then only the listener or the receiver comes to know what the speaker or the sender actually meant by what the message that he sent. But representational language means it's a special use of language. The kind of language that is often used in literature is representational, because you need to bring your imagination into play in order to decode that properly. If you don't make use of your imaginative faculties, It is imaginative decoding of the language that is presented there. So this imaginative decoding makes this language use representational. I'm sure all of you have come across this use of language in different works of literature. Say, for example, you might have read the poem. I'm sure you have all read the poem "Elegy Written on a Country Churchyard" by Thomas Gray. And this is how the poem begins. The ploughman plods his weary way and leaves the curfew tolls the knell. I don't want to recite the whole poem. The ploughman plods his weary way. The curfew tolls the knell of the parting day and leaves the world to darkness and to me. The lines go on like that. But if you look at the first line, the ploughman plods his weary way. That's a very good example of representational use of language. The question here is the way that is really weary, is the way that is really tired? The plowman plods his weary way. Is the way that is weary? Is the way that is tired, or is the plowman that is tired? So I think that literary device is called transferred epithet. So when you are employing that literary device called transferred epithet, we know it is not the way that is tired, it's not the way that is weary, it's actually the plowman who is weary. So this kind of use, in some, if you have read the story A Long Walk Home by Jason Boccaro, there is an expression which goes like this: a rush of sadness passed through him. We know this is not referential language, so this is representational language. And when you say somebody wanted to follow the footsteps of Nimrod, I think it's a story used in most of the schools in India, Mrs. Packletide's Tiger by Zaki. So in the first part of that short story, you have this expression: Mrs. Packletide wanted to follow the footsteps of Nimrod. So what does it mean to follow the footsteps of Nimrod? It doesn't have one-to-one correspondence between the real message and the words that are used here. So you need to use your imaginative faculties if you want to decode the message conveyed in those words. So you have, again, you have, if you remember Chinternabi lines by Wordsworth: 5 summers have passed with the length of 5 long winters. So what does that mean? So summer here stands for something and winter here stands for something else. So this kind of use of language is representational language. And in education, whether it is something related to language or any other topic, any subject or language, whatever it is, the use of representational language has its role to play, because it requires the learner to use his imaginative faculties, his critical thinking faculties. And that, of course, is basically the real purpose of education itself. And that is what you can see here on the, as the next point: short stories enhance critical thinking. So, which of course is very crucial to any educational program. So these are some of the advantages of using short stories. Now, having discussed the advantages of using literature, or the advantages of using short stories in particular, let's see what we actually mean by linguistic competence. What does linguistic competence actually mean? I think it was a concept developed by Chomsky. Linguistic competence is not only the use of correct language, but it is using language correctly and appropriately. So the appropriate use of language is also important. This is the point that we were discussing before when we talked about cultural appropriateness, because what is appropriate in one culture may not be appropriate in another culture. So a certain expression may be perfectly fine in one particular culture, but that may not be acceptable at all in another culture. I can give you some examples. For example, the use of Mr. You see, In the British variety of English, Mr. actually goes with, it's a title, it goes with the last name of the person. It goes with the last name of the person. John Shakespeare is known as Shakespeare because that is a British culture. Because very often it is the last name, which is used like we use the first name in our culture in India. But I don't know how it is in all the cultures, but at least in some parts of India, titles actually, the last name actually is not the real name. It is not even the family name. It is not, in some cases, it is the name of the father. You have your name as the first name, and then you have your father's name. And if you are a girl, once you get married, the husband's name replaces father's name there. And in some cases, people have the habit of the practice of using initials. And in some other cases, the last name is always the name of your caste. In some place, here in Oman, it is the name of your tribe. So this is a tribal community at large. So people belong to different tribes. So the last name is always the name of the tribe. So if you use Mr. with the last name, you are addressing that person by the name of his tribe, which of course is fine here. But in some cultural context, where casteism is very dominant, where casteism is, it has lots of connotative meanings, where you think of hierarchies in caste. If you address a person who belongs to the lower hierarchy, it is like an insult. In some parts of India, if you call people by the name of their caste, it's a crime. You can be arrested and you can be put in jail. So cultural appropriacy, because meaning is also socially constructed. Meaning is socially constructed. That is what what we speak of when you talk about sign. That is what we say, right? The sign need not signify the signified, in the sense it's not always the same sign and the same meaning for all the signs. What is acceptable in one culture may not be acceptable in another culture. For example, another example, how are you? How are you simply a greeting. When it comes to the British culture, when you meet a person for the first time, you may say, how are you? You may say good morning, or you may say, how are you? But in some cultures, how are you is not a greeting. How are you is a real question. I read somewhere in Brazil, if you ask somebody, they will start answering the question as if it's a question. And then they will start telling you the whole story about what happened to them the previous day. So if you are busy, if you are rushing to some place, and if you meet somebody on the way, and if you are in Brazil, please don't say how are you, because if you ask how are you, they take it as a genuine question. So meaning is socially constructed, and linguistic competence requires this cultural awareness. Otherwise, what you say may not be culturally appropriate. That means you haven't communicated properly. Communication actually fails if you don't have the awareness of the cultural context. It's like the use of uncle in India. Our children call our friends uncle. Any elderly person is called an uncle. A housemaid in our family is called auntie. Children call her auntie. This is the way children address her. So these are culturally appropriate usages. So in the international context, where you communicate, with communities like never before, it's also important that we become culturally aware. And short stories can, of course, help us. And that is what we discussed before. So linguistic competence means it is not only the correct use of vocabulary and syntax and applying the proper grammar rules. It also means the kind of language to be used in different contexts, including a cultural context, because we have varying pragmatics. A greeting is not a greeting everywhere. It can be a question, as we discussed just now. Now, I also said, short stories help develop critical thinking. Now, what actually is critical thinking? I think I need to rush a little now. So critical thinking actually means thinking differently. Critical thinking is making your own meaning. You start questioning, you start examining, you start solving problems on your own, you interpret in your own way. So it simply means you think differently. So thinking differently means, it is like saying 1 plus 1 is not always 2. So that is a different way of thinking, looking at things. 1 plus 1 need not be 2 always. There is a very famous writer in Malayalam. His name is Vaikam Muhammad Bashir, and he has he wrote a novel titled Balyakala Sagi. I'm giving you an example from that. So when the teacher asks Majid, what is 1 plus 1? Majid says 1 plus 1 is a bigger one. That is divergent thinking. That is thinking in a different way. And that is critical thinking actually. And why does Majid say 1 plus 1 is a bigger one and not 2? Because he says, I see 2 rivers joining, one coming from the east and one coming from the south and one coming from the north. And when they merge, when these 2 rivers merge, they don't become 2 rivers. So when one merges with another one, it becomes a bigger one. So that is why, that is how Majid explains that, which of course is divergent thinking, which of course is critical thinking. So critical thinking basically means your ability to look at one and the same thing from different perspectives. So this is divergent thinking. And what actually is divergent thinking? It's the ability to see lots of possible answers to one question. So it's not always one question has one right answer. It's not always like that. One question can have different answers. So if 2 plus 5 is of course 7, but is there a possibility that 9 plus 5 can be 2? Is there a possibility that 9 plus 5, when you add 5 to 9, it can become 2? Of course, it can become 2. It depends. It depends on the context. It depends on the system that you are referring to. If you are talking about time, if it's 9 o'clock, after few hours, let us say after the passing of 5 hours, it will be 2 o'clock. So 9 plus 5 becomes 2 in that case. So critical thinking means your ability to think differently, your ability to look at one point from different perspectives. And we will see. And this is, of course, an important part of communicative competence. And our point here is, what we are coming to is how we can use short stories to promote all these things. How we can use short stories for promoting critical thinking, which in turn will enhance our learners' communicative competence. Okay, so here you have heard of Bloom's taxonomy, Benjamin Bloom's taxonomy of critical thinking. So he talks about 2 categories of critical thinking. The first one, what you can see at the bottom of this pyramid, he puts it in the form of an inverted pyramid. So what you can see at the bottom, those 3, remember, understand, apply. He calls them LOTS, L-O-T-S, or lower order thinking skills. And what you have on top, those 3 things, analyze, evaluate, and create, are higher order thinking skills. So we are going to focus more on higher order thinking skills, how we can develop the higher order thinking skills, which in turn will enhance the communicative competence of our learners through the proper, fruitful, and effective use of short stories. So that's what we are going to discuss today. So analyze, evaluate, and create. All right. So I have a cartoon here. It's a cartoon. It is Lashman's. You all know R.K. Lashman. So R.K. Narayan's brother. So R.K. Lashman's cartoon. So you have a cartoon here. If you think critical thinking is so important to develop what you call communicative competence, so let us look at it from different perspectives. So what do you think of this picture? You have a cow or a bull, whatever, and you have the driver there. It's raining. Do you think this driver is stupid, or do you think he is intelligent? I leave it to you. It is for you to think differently. Some of you might consider him as a stupid driver, or some of you might think of him as an intelligent person. But whatever you think, you need to come out with your own justifications. That actually is divergent thinking. All right. So now let us come to the main part of our our session today, how we can use short stories to promote critical thinking, to promote divergent thinking, to familiarize learners with varying pragmatics in different cultures, and how all these things can be fruitfully used through different activities to enhance the communicative competence of our learners. So these are some of the possible tasks. Analyzing short stories, employing the principles of varying theories of literary criticism. So we have different theories in literary criticism. Of course, we have formalism, we have deconstruction, we have the structuralist approach, we have the psycholinguistic approach. So we can ask our students to interpret short stories, or to analyze short stories, which of course is part of the higher order thinking skills in Bloom's taxonomy, as you can see here. And that is one possible task. Another possible task is we can give them a short story and we can ask them to identify the cultural elements, in those short stories. Another very interesting activity is perhaps reconstructing short stories from varying points of view. We will work out a few of these, and then we will see how these activities help improve the communicative competence of our learners. So you can reconstruct a story from different points of view. It is not always the same point of view, and that is what Derrida talks about when he talks about what he call that structure, free play of elements, all those things in his theory of deconstruction. So you have a central character in a story, and when the story is narrated from the point of view of the central character, the version of the story that you get is one. But if you give the opportunity to another character in the story to tell the same story that is being narrated from a different point of view, and then of course the story will be a different story. Say for example, you think about Romeo and Juliet. When the story is narrated from the point of view of Romeo and Juliet, you get one story. Do you think that Romeo will still be the hero if the story is narrated from the point of view of Juliet's father? Juliet was only 14 years, when she fell in love with Romeo. So if the story is narrated from the point of view of Juliet's father, are we going to have the same story? Or are we going to deconstruct that story? Are we going to have a different version of the story? So these are some of the possibilities, you see. So you give a short story to the students and you can ask them to reconstruct the story from a different point of view. So we are moving ahead. We are going further from what you call mere comprehension of the story to developing the skills, reading, speaking, writing, all those things. Another very interesting activity is writing mini sagas. Mini sagas are stories written exactly in 50 words. We will discuss that in detail. So you can give them a passage and extract from the story, and we can ask them to develop or convert that passage into a dialogue, and the same dialogue can be used as an extended activity for role play. We can develop different grammar activities. We can also develop vocabulary activities. We can develop prediction, comprehension, and critical thinking questions. You can ask the students to retell the story. It can be given as a chain activity. One student narrates one part of the story, and that is followed by the second student. He takes up or she takes up the second part of the story. So you have speaking, listening, all those things involved there. We can also ask students to discuss the referential and the representational use of language. You can give them some examples like I gave you before. For example, if you are teaching the Tempest, Shakespeare's Tempest, of course you will come across lots of representational use of language in short stories also. But if you remember those lines from the Tempest where Prospero says, "We are made of such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep," which of course, if you want to decode that message, you need to use your imaginative faculties to get the message contained in those lines. So you can ask students to discuss that, decode the representational use of language. All right, now let us get into a very small activity and let us see how we can, I'm going to practically demonstrate, having discussed all these things, how can we apply all these things in real teaching? So we have talked about lots of theories. We have talked about critical thinking, communicative competence, varying pragmatics, cultural appropriateness, all those things. Now let us see how we can, practically make use of all these elements in the real classroom. So I have chosen here a very small story, which is very practical, very simple. And I think most of you have read this story, The Moth and the Star by James Thurber. Okay, let us go through this very quickly. A young and impressionable moth once set his heart on a certain star. He told his mother about this, and she counseled him to set his heart on a bridge lamp instead. Stars aren't the thing to hang around, she said. Lamps are the thing to hang around. You get somewhere that way, said the moth's father. You don't get anywhere chasing stars. But the moth would not heed the words of either parent. Every evening at dusk, when the star came out, he would start flying toward it. And every morning at dawn, he would crawl back home, worn out with his vain endeavor. One day, his father said to him, "You haven't burned a wing in months, boy, and it looks to me as if you were never going to. All your brothers have been badly burned flying around street lamps, and all your sisters have been terribly singed flying around house lamps. Come on now, get out of here and get yourself scorched. A big strapping moth like you without a mark on him." The moth left his father's house, but he would not fly around street lamps and he would not fly around house lamps. He went right on trying to reach the star, which was 4 1/3 light years or 25 trillion miles away. The moth thought it was just caught up in the top branches of an M. He never did reach the star. He never did reach the star, but he went right on trying night after night. And when he was a very, very old moth, he began to think that he really had reached the star, and he went around saying so. This gave him a deep and lasting pleasure, and he lived to a great old age. His parents, his brothers, and his sisters had all been burned to death when they were quite young. And there is a moral given at the bottom there. Who flies afar from the sphere of our sorrow is here today and here tomorrow. Now, if we can go back to the first part of the story, making use of this part of the story, I'll go through this quickly because I think we have only 10 to 15 minutes left. Yeah. How much time do I have? Do I have
Yes,
something like?
Yes, sir, you can take it.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. So based on this story, we can ask certain questions to our learners to promote their linguistic competence. Maybe to begin with, we can ask them a question like this: how is the central character referred to, not described as in the opening sentence? So if you look at the opening sentence here, a young and impressionable moth once set his heart on a certain star. So a young moth is the central character here. So how is the moth referred to, not described as? The moth is described as young and impressionable. But we know the answer is he is referred to as a moth in the first sentence. And then we can ask the students, later in the story, does the author refer to the moth as a moth or the moth? Of course, he uses the word the moth, said the moth's father. You have it here. Said the moth's father. So why it is a here and why it is the here? So we are making them aware of the use of the definite article and the indefinite article, which I don't want to explain. Of course, we all know that. But when you are using this kind of stories, we can also draw their attention to the use of language in the story. So how does the author avoid referring to the moth as the moth again and again? You see, he doesn't use the word the moth again and again. How does he avoid using that? Of course, the answer is he uses pronouns. You have the word he here, and you will find he starts with a young moth, and then he uses the moth, and then it's always he. So the use of pronoun, you can also draw our learners' attention to that. You see, so which word does the word parent substitute? So you have the word parent here. The moth would not heed the words of either parent. So which word does the word parent substitute? Of course, the answer we know, it substitutes the two words father and mother. And then, to check their understanding of the word parent, we can ask them a comprehension question like, it's called a concept check question. We call it CCQ, concept check questions. You can ask them which word is broader. Which word is broader among the three, father, mother, parent? Of course, the answer is the word parent is broader in meaning because it can be either father or mother. So you can develop so many questions like that. Now, another question here is, which expression is the near opposite of the expression every evening at dusk? So you can ask them that question. We don't have to give the answer. We can draw their attention to these uses in the story, and we can ask them to identify the contextual opposite. Every evening at dusk, of course, you have the expression every morning at dawn. So they can find it out from the story for themselves, the contextual opposite of this word, the opposite. And then, of course, what are the opposites of evening and dusk? The opposite of evening, and what's the opposite of dusk here? So by throwing these kind of questions to the students, I think we can make them aware of the way language is used differently. So now let me show you some other questions here. These are all I have copied these lines from the story so that we don't have to go back to the story now. So we can also ask them some questions like this. What's the difference between the underlined words in the following sentences? All these are sentences taken from the story. And by the way, these are activities developed by Professor Patil, and I took it from one of his presentations, and I'm just sharing it with you now. So one day his father said to him, look at the underlined word him there in the first sentence. And in the second sentence, a big and strapping moth like you without a mark on him. So we can draw their attention to the different ways in which the same pronoun him is used. So what does him mean in the first sentence, and what does him refer to in the second sentence? Of course, as we know, in the first sentence, him refers to that particular moth in the story. But here in the second sentence, the very word him refers to not that particular moth, but moths in general. A big and strapping moth like you without a mark on him. So how can there be a moth, any moth? So here it can be any moth, but in the first sentence, it refers to the particular moth mentioned in the story. You see how we can make them aware of the different ways in which, that pronoun is used. All right. Now, again, you have some more activities in the same line. What do the underlined expressions in the following sentences substitute for? He told his mother about this. About this. What does this stand for? About his setting the heart or setting his mind on a certain star, of course. She counseled him to set his heart on a bridge lamp instead. So what does instead here stand for? And if you look at D there, it looks to me as if you were never going to. So what does going to refer to? We know the normal use of going to, but see the way in which, or the meaning in which going to is used in this particular context. I think activities like this will help in making students aware of how language can be used in multiple ways, and that of course will enhance their linguistic competence. Now look at these look at this pair, the pair of sentences here. and we can ask them to compare. You see, the first sentence is the revised one, the modified one. The second one is the one that is used in the story. All your brothers and sisters have been badly burned, flying around street and house lamps respectively. This is not the sentence we have in the story. Look at the sentence we have in the story. All your brothers have been badly burned, flying around street lamps, and all your sisters have been terribly singed, flying around house lamps. So we can ask our students to compare these two sentences, and we can ask them which one they would like to use if they are writing a story. Which one is more impressive, and why it has become more impressive? You see, so that way we are making them aware of what you call language used in literature and language used in academic writing. I think the first one is a piece of academic writing, but the second one matches with a literary word. So how language can be used in different ways in different contexts. If you are engaged in what you call a piece of academic writing, the word respectively fits very well there, but not in a literary piece of word. So you have more questions in the same line. The moth left his father's house and would not fly around street and house lamps. The moth left his father's house, but he would not fly around street lamps, and he would not fly around house lamps. So the focus here is on repetition. You see, certain structures are repeated, and when certain structures are repeated, it adds beauty to that piece of writing. That makes it more meaningful. So we can draw, you can familiarize learners by developing activities like this. Yeah, so again, if you want to go to the higher level, we can ask them to rewrite the story from the point of view of the father. Like we talked about Juliet's father telling the story of Romeo and Juliet. How do you think the story will be if it is narrated from the point of view of the moth's father? Do you think you will have the same story, or will there be a different story? Again, if you focus on that, if you notice that the moth's sisters were flying around house lamps, the moth's sisters were flying around house lamps, and the moth's brothers were flying around street lamps. Does something strike you there? Does something ring? The sisters fly around house lamps and the brothers fly around street lamps. So if you want to develop critical thinking, we can ask our students that question: why? What does it tell you about the customs practiced in the moth's family? Can you relate that can you relate that in some way to our real life? So why are the sisters always flying around the house lamps and the brothers are allowed to fly around street lamps, like we have in one of our advertisements? Why should boys have all the fun? You see, how come they can fly around street lamps, but not what you call these poor girl moths? So what I'm telling is, you can develop similar kind of activities based on any short story, and these activities, of course, will develop what you call critical thinking. And we can also ask our students. I'm going to wind up now. We can also ask our students to write mini sagas, which will certainly promote their creative thinking and critical thinking. Mini sagas are short stories written exactly in 50 words with a twist at the end. It has a beginning, it has a middle, like in all stories. Let me just give you one mini saga as an example here, and then maybe you can develop your own mini sagas. It has a title, Written in the Cards. Why it becomes a challenging activity is because you have to write this story exactly in 50 words. It cannot be one word less, it cannot be one word more. That means the student has to edit, revise, go back to the story, change certain phrases, maybe use one words in certain context, maybe remove the one word and use certain phrasal verbs there if you want to increase the number of words. So that way they get the opportunity to play with language, and when you play with language, of course, you are improving your linguistic skills. Now let us quickly go through this story. She recognized the writing on the envelope immediately. The gypsy had warned her that she had no future with this man. Yet here he was, 5 lonely years after their last meeting, begging her to join him in New York. So this is what happens. Now look at the last part of the story. She felt unbelievably happy as she stepped on board the Titanic. So I believe you can see the twist there. You know what happened to the Titanic. So you can give students certain topics, maybe a topic like friendship, honesty, hard work, lying, expectation, surprise, and then you can ask them to develop what you call mini sagas like this. So you can also give them very short stories written in less than 50 words, and you can ask them to develop that story into a mini saga. So here is one story. I got it in WhatsApp one of these days, then I thought I could use it here. So this story has only 38 words. That means the students need to supply other 12 words to make it 50. So you need to develop. You need to be imaginative and creative and develop this into a full mini saga exactly in 50 words. And look at this story here. I think it was written in the context of Corona, perhaps. An artist and a mother, often scolded her 6-year-old son, for he could never draw a straight line. As he breathed slowly into the ventilator, she begged him to make one more crooked line on the ECG. On the ECG, nobody wants a straight line. On the ECG, we all want crooked lines, right? So you can give, stories, what you call flash stories or short stories like this, and we can ask our students to develop this into a mini saga. I think that will help in improving their creativity. And by giving them opportunities to play with language in different ways like this, of course, we can help them improve their linguistic competence. If I can afford to have 10 more minutes, I would like to play the video. Otherwise, I would like to stop here and then we can move on to the question answer session. We have come to the concluding session. So thank you very much for joining me this session this afternoon. Thank you for your wonderful participation, and I would be ready to answer. I am ready to answer your questions if you have any. Thank you once again.
Yes, thank you, sir, for delivering the wonderful session. So, sir, I have collected few questions now. The first question is, how can we improve our critical thinking?
Okay. Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer, right? But to give you some tips on improving critical thinking, as I mentioned in my talk, in order to develop your critical thinking, you should be able to look at an idea from different perspectives. You should be open-minded. You should not be prejudiced. You should be ready to accept. You should be willing to accept different versions of opinions. We should know that truth is not always one and the same. There can be multiple variations of the same thing. So the first thing is, like a true researchers, we must always have an openness to accept different opinions and to look at things from different perspectives. So I think that is the basic quality we all need to have if we want to develop our critical thinking.
Okay,
To
sir.
go out of the box. We should be ready to go out of the box and think.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Second question, what type of stories can be imparted to tertiary learners, level learners, to make the language study more interesting? Tertiary
Okay.
level learners.
Tertiary level learners, very good. So if you have tertiary level learners, that means you have, in a way, you have advanced level learners actually. So to them, I mean, for those kinds of students, we can really use the modern short stories. Instead of using fairy tales, maybe in lower levels, we can go for fables, fairy tales, anecdotes, where you have animal characters and godmothers and, all those fairies appearing. Those kinds of stories will be of interest to lower level students, especially if you consider their age.
But if you have advanced level students, it is for the teacher to grade and select properly. And that is why we have something called gradation and selection. So we need to choose stories which of course have what you call language that is challenging to their level. If there is no challenge, of course it won't be interesting to the students also. So the concepts must be interesting to them, and cultural appropriateness is again very important. So you should know the cultural background of the students whom you are teaching. So based on all those things, you need to grade properly. You need to consider sentence length, the language that is used there. Again, we can use stories which put knowledge demands on you. If you have advanced level students, that means to understand the story, you need to have understanding of certain other things outside the story. So such things will be of interest to students in the advanced level. Yeah.
Okay. So that was wonderful question and answer session. So one more question. In this present context of online teaching, how can we make literature more interesting?
Okay. So I mean, in the context of online teaching, of
Online
course,
teaching.
online teaching, of course, what we can do is we need to engage students in activities, because basically engagement becomes the problem in the context of online teaching. So we need to develop activities, worksheets, and we need
Yes.
to give them assignments which will require students to do an in-depth analysis and study of the piece of work given to them.
Yes.
So I think those kinds of activities will make, literature teaching, learning interesting in the context of this online teaching. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sir. I think we have come to the end of the session. Thank you, sir, for delivering the wonderful session.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for your valuable answer, sir. And at this pleasure moment, we would like to present our appreciation certificate to the chief guest. May I request Akshaya to display the appreciation certificate to us?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. And finally, we have to give the perfect end of this program. And I would like to call upon Akshaya to present the vote of thanks.
Yes, thank you, Jai Mata ma'am, for calling me to deliver the vote of thanks. I would maintain that thanks are the highest form of thought, and that gratitude is happiness, doubled by wonder. Well, being said, happy evening, everyone. I deem it's a great privilege to have been asked to extend a vote of thanks on this wonderful occasion for the international webinar on From Literature to Communicative Competence, the Paradigm Shift. My sincere thanks to our resource person, Dr. Roy, in today's program. In spite of his busy schedule, he accepted the invitation and he enriches with his knowledge to all the participants with the use of literature in general and short stories in particular in enhancing the literature competence of the learners of English. Thank you, sir. I would like to I would like to take this opportunity to express the hearty thanks to our management and the Honorable President Engineer ACS Arun Kumar, sir, for his support and guidance on on this occasion by giving an extended to all of us at this in the department. I am extremely thankful to our Joint Register of Phase II, Dr. S. Ramalingam, and respected Dean Dr. S. Manivannan, Deputy Dean both A.R. Arnachalam sir and Professor K. Sendilkumar sir of Administration for their enormous support and guidance in conducting various programs. I thank Mrs. A. Julie Elizabeth for providing me this wonderful opportunity to deliver the vote of thanks. Also, I thank Mrs. Jayamata for beautifully mastering this event, and also I thank Professor Dr. P. Hashni for introducing a chief guest. It was a stunning profile. I also extend my heartfelt thanks to Mr. Ganesh Babu, System Admin of CSE Department, for his never-ending support and cooperation. Last but not least, I thank our participants for making this event a resounding success. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Dear participants, as I earlier told you, the feedback cum assessment form, it will be available in YouTube description box. You are requested to complete and submit your form before 6 p.m. Later, the form will be deactivated. The e-certificate for the participants will send it to the registered email ID immediately on completion of feedback form. We have come to an end of the program. Hope you all enjoy the session. Until then, we will meet in the next program. And don't forget to submit your feedback and subscribe our YouTube channel, Dr.MGR University Phase II Digital Learning, for further updates and about our programs and videos. Thank you all, my dear participants. Make this moment and pleasant and lovely. Thank you all.